A bloody war for survival lasted for many years. The world that humanity knew was completely destroyed. The lives of thousands of people changed forever. Now, with the appearance of monsters, all of humanity was on the verge of extinction. And all this happened because of one man. The Earth was a living hell. The general who won the world war. The general could not stop. He held all of humanity in his hands. The cruel leader took away everyone's freedom and equality. He drew cruel lines between people, creating boundaries between them. Thus, cruelty was born. He tried for a long time to change human psychology and turn people into slaves ready to kill. As a result, death no longer had any meaning. From a dictator, he became a cult figure and created his own ideology, the essence of which was death and violence. He was a cruel emperor who ruled the whole world and all people. Their goal was destruction and chaos, which began to reign on Earth. People did not understand the main thing and joyfully applauded him. The man was able to become a deity, whom they began to worship and glorify. And those who did not listen to him became abnormal. They were rejected by society. He was among those who started the war. The main character is an experienced soldier. He was the one who tried to fight for peace and justice. He was the one who fought monsters for the sake of all the people who did not support him at all and tried to destroy him. It was more than a war. It was a game of survival, in which only a few and the most adaptable would survive. Only one would survive. And on this battlefield, it had to be him. It was a difficult time when you had to kill. Many simply had no choice, so they did it for their own survival. At that very moment, another life was lost. The bullet flew straight into the poor soldier's head. In this game, he lost. People rejoiced that now there was a new winner of the tournament. Thousands watched what was happening. They applauded the new hero and congratulated the winner. What an ordinary girl who had never killed before could become. Now she had turned into a monster and cold-bloodedly dealt with everyone who stood in her way. A woman in a wheelchair watched the games the whole time, but she didn't understand if the heroine was really happy about her victory. Suddenly, a guest who came every day to visit her came in. Every day, the guy came at the same time, and she was happy to see him. But today, she seemed upset and not like herself. She didn't really understand why people had become so cruel, and why death had now become entertainment for all of them. The man tried to cheer Julia up and asked if she had eaten anything. They had food, thanks to her brother, who provided them with everything they needed. But today, he came with sad news. Life had changed. Now he had to leave. And in fact, he didn't know if he would ever be able to return. And he began to apologize because he really didn't want to leave her. That evening was ordinary. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. Suddenly, an alarm sounded, warning the whole city of danger. This had never happened before, so people were completely unprepared for it. The hero woke up to the alarm, but for a long time, he couldn't understand what was happening. But suddenly, he woke up and got out of bed. The guy felt anxious. He told her to stay in bed while he went to check what was really happening. The man approached the window and began to listen. It was a check. All citizens had to be checked in order to find traitors. For safety reasons, everyone had to obey the police robots and do what they were told. The army began searching the streets, checking every house. The hero began to get noticeably nervous. He wasn't ready for this, especially on this evening. Now, people's screams could be heard in the street. The works were removed from their own homes for neutral suspicion and violation. The guy understood, if they want to survive, you need to run away. Therefore, they quickly started collecting things, and Julia didn't understand what happened. After a while, they have already left their own apartment and were outside. People began to flee, escaping from death and torture. Fires and panic began in the city. The works used weapons against those who tried to resist. Suddenly, Julia has a very bad head, and she almost lost consciousness. Suddenly, the guy stopped on the middle of the street. He saw a bright ray of light that came to them and heard the steps. The police shone the flashlight just on them, and now the work began to approach. Immediately, they began to use weapons and tried to attack fugitives. The hero got a strong blow to the current, and his whole body became paralyzed. The blow was very strong and painful, so he could not hurt anything. He lost consciousness and found himself on Earth. On the verge of life and death, he tried to rise and overcome the pain. Meanwhile, the works were able to reach Julia. They turned her cart, and now she also found herself on the ground and was helpless. She was very scared, and she didn't understand what she would expect. Suddenly, scanning began. Who had to determine whether they were traitors to the state? The works were checked by the data of their pupils and blood with the help of an accurate laser. After that, the boy was detained by law. He was assigned 5 years in prison. Victor began to pick up a police officer, and the girl could not help him. In fact, the guy was in the army resistance. The police found out all the information about it by scanning, and they concluded that he was the enemy of the people. By force, he was started to be taken away and loaded into a military car. He asked Julia not to approach so that she was also not hit. Now, he was ordered to arrest and establish cruel punishment. The stroke again, much stronger than the previous one. It was painful. However, he realized that difficult trials would be waiting for him. The girl remained alone, helpless, in the middle of a night city street. He will no longer be able to help her and did not know when they could meet again and be together. But he knew it would end quickly. Therefore, despite the crying and cry of Julia, he tried to sit quietly. He convinced her that everything would be fine and everything was fine with him. And this was only a temporary nightmare, like a terrible dream. But suddenly a police officer came and ordered to kill all the rebels and witnesses to the last person. But the robot did not dare to shoot and kill a girl, because the check showed that it was not on the rebel list and it did not carry any threat to the government. But a cruel man thought completely differently. He again ordered to kill her. However, this time the works did not obey it. At this point, the hero was completely broken, and the police officer, joining the gun to the head of Julia, was about to kill her. It seemed that the main character's heart stopped at this moment. He could not allow through him, not a guilty person, especially Julia. She was frightened and already prepared to die. The man asked who she was for Victor and why he took her with him and tried to save. Victor did not answer. He knew that any answer could turn against him. It seemed that Julia was disappointed in it because she looked at him as a traitor. And then he replied that she was no one for him. It was hard, but he realized that only so could it be saved the girl's life. It seemed that his response was satisfied with the police officer. Therefore, he ordered him to take it away and put it in the car. However, he continued to keep the girl and seemed to not even about to let her go. At this point, Victor realized that something was wrong here. It seemed to be deceived, and knowing that, she started crying. And the policeman smiled, horrifying. His face was horrible at that moment. Now he was preparing to shoot again, so he shot the trigger on the gun. In an anger impulse, Victor began shouting. He wanted to break free, but the works were holding it firmly and began to beat again. To restrain it, they used a current again, but even that did not help and stop the guy. He tried to resist and stay on his feet. Still, he managed to escape, and right now he rushed to rescue his girlfriend. He was in his best. He hurried to her because he understood that she could have perished at any moment. However, he did not have time, and the police officer fired on Julia's face. She was too young to die. The robot also fired, trying to stop the hero. Blood appeared on his body, and he felt as she began to flow on his belly and back. Julia was dead, and now he will never be able to turn back in life to correct everything and return it. A police officer is a cruel man who was satisfied with his work. A person's life meant nothing for him. He was lying near the body of the dead Julia and wept, because now nothing could be changed. Suddenly, an unknown girl who had never seen before was approached. She was very surprised that even after the wound he managed to survive and he could even move. The police officer ordered her to go so that the hero and the dead woman could spend time together. But the girl saw that he died through a terrible wound on his back. The guy was crying in pain. He wanted to beat, scream, but he couldn't. The girl said goodbye to him and went away. And the man continued to lie in his own blood in the rain. He was going to take revenge, and his revenge will be cruel. 5 years ago, he just got out of Vianitsa and he had nothing. Suddenly, a girl who wanted to help came to him. It was a Julia that smiled at him and brought some food. It seemed to be very sincere to him, because she could not leave the person on the street to die from cold and famine. She became his rescuer, and for that, he was grateful to her until his death. She was able to help him in those difficult times, but now he was lying in their bed. In law, he looked after him and helped in treatment. It was he who found him and took him home. He rescued him and now constantly oversees Victor and treated his wounds. However, Victor still felt very bad. His chest and wound were hurting. In addition, the thirst for revenge did not give him rest, and he promised to do everything to kill his enemies. He turned on the news that reported a dangerous offender who tried to attempt an official. She was Sylvia, the former winner of survival games. Now it also became the insurgents and has already been searched. Lieutenant Miller was the main thing in the fight against traitors, so he was tasked with this task. In the morning, his rank was increased because he managed to catch one of the criminals. Hearing this, Victor almost crazy about anger. So it was the same freak who killed his lover and almost took away his life from himself. On TV, Miller talked about his special unit. It was a team that was not guided by people, but work, because police did not want the risk of their lives. In addition, it was very strange that Miller was able to move so quickly and get such a high rank. He was the son of Generalissimus, so it was expected. In addition, the powers of this scoundrel have been expanded, and now he could do everything he pleased. Also, it was stated that survival games had to be closed. However, Miller personally forbade to do so, because he wanted all people to see blood and get used to his regime and cruelty. And while their special unit exists, they will control and hunt all insurgents. Victor could no longer listen to him. He understood that he was now, the man became a serious enemy for him. So survival games and all, and cruelty will continue. From anger, Victor gnashed his teeth. He tried to break the TV because he could no longer see the general. Victor realized that the place on Earth would become a hell for him and such as him. However, most of all, he wanted to take Miller with him. When he got better, they decided to bury Julia on a high hill near the tree. The grave was very modest, and near the wooden cross, he put her photo. Victor tried to hold on and not lower his hands. It was difficult for him, because he blamed himself most of all in her death. The man merged with himself, and he hated that he came to her that evening and pulled behind. In-law was painful to watch him. When Victor would be able to take revenge, he asked to bury him next to her after his own death. It was his last desire, and the only thing he wanted. Now the difficult days began. The hero trained and became better. Before the beginning of the survival game, very little time remained, so he had to have time to bring himself to good shape. Victor did not keep his effort and time. He had to be the winner in the game and prove that is a worthy rival. The thought of revenge did not give him rest. After all, it is after the games he will have a chance to get closer to his enemy and strike. As before in-law, he constantly came to him and brought food. This time, he brought special materials about a survival game that had to start. To participate, it was necessary to go through regional selection, and there was too little time. In-law had to flee and wanted to bring a hero with him. However, he had completely different intentions. He could not continue to use his kindness and eat his food. But in-law was not about to throw it. He brought a bag of money for all the expenses that will be needed for cooking. Victor could not believe his own eyes. He was grateful to him for everything he did for him. After all, the guy risked his life and freedom, because of contact with the detainee, he could also be accused of crimes. Victor wanted to shake his hand. In-law, he was glad that now they were real friends. He promised to thank him for everything he did. Victor came to a big city in order to start making its plan. Now they were preparing for the hardest stage in their lives, the beginning of survival games. Among people, there were many experienced participants, and soon, they will all become enemies, and they will kill each other for survival and glory. Because only 1 of 100 people will be able to survive and go the game until the end. Such were the rules, and now that they were to enter the arena, there was no way back. There were flags from a photo of a party leader who was organizer of the tournament. He said that each participant was waiting for glory, wealth, and success. But everyone knew that, in fact, it was not at all. Games. It is only cruelty, blood, and death. It is not clear that made everyone go to the right death. However, the gates began to open. All people were met by a man in military uniform. It seemed that it was a general. The man seemed very harsh and cruel, and his appearance spoke everything for himself. Each of them, for a long time, remembers this moment of their own life. However, Victor decided, no step back. He will not give up for nothing and retreat from his goal. It crossed the threshold of the arena and entered the inside where it all began. The doors behind them closed, and people were in a narrow hallway. Inside was very clean, light, and good. Ahead, there were large doors that only had management access to. Now they are in a narrow and dark room. The men were divided and forced to stand at a distance from each other. And now, they needed to wait until their serving began. Unlike others, the main character sat on Earth and seemed very calm. He was approached by one of the participants who wanted to get acquainted and find out what they named and forced to get inside the arena. Also, the old man offered him to unite in order for them to be more likely to survive. Suddenly, the door to the room opened. However, Victor did not even want to listen to him, but was attached to his own purpose. A lot of soldiers have entered the room. They lined up in a row and waited for the emergence of the man. The man greeted all the participants and began to applaud them. There was silence inside, and everyone was watching what would happen next. The man named his name and greeted each of them. Now everyone had to find a special device that will be from the beginning to the end. It was a clock that contained all the necessary information. Now they had to go to the arena, so each of them had to follow the instructions. Each of the men had a number. Suddenly, an unknown man clicked his fingers, and everyone realized that on his team, something incomprehensible began to happen. Many of them were difficult to maintain the balance. The clock fully controlled the body of its owner. The man began to smile maliciously watching it. A special device reminiscent of the camera appeared in front of each player. Each had his own that corresponded to his unique number. This could be easily defined by the same number that was on the clock. It was like a small house, and now everyone could enter inside. Victor was hostile to what happened, however, tried to remain calm. When he entered, he noticed that it was quite spacious. Inside was a chair and a seatbelt that had to send a person at the beginning of the test. The countdown has also begun. Each of them has to be moved to a special arena. Teleporting was accompanied by severe pain and stress that each of the people felt. It seemed that boxes began to fall underground. But suddenly, they, like rockets, got into the air. Now, they were flying in an unknown direction, directly into the place of their battle. From that moment on, they were no longer friends, but have become swallowed enemies for each other. Victor realized that now he began to feel much better, and the flight managed to move calmly. They continued to rise uphill. Then, each of the capsules went down in different places, far from other participants. The main character realized that he managed to move into a foggy forest. Also, he learned that the likelihood of falling out of valuable items was very low. The level of danger in this place was very high. Victor left his capsule to see what happened around him. The first thing he managed to see is a small house near him. Now, he prepared. From that moment on, a deadly survival game began. Each cell of his body was ready for it. He did not forget about his abuser, and about a sweetheart, through which he was preparing for so long to this day. Now he began to run. He wanted to increase his level until other people did. Finally, he managed to get to him. He carefully opened the door and wanted to enter inside. It was quite cozy and spacious. Sometime, it can be a good place for overnight stay or rest. He started to search the house but found nothing but a stick. Also, there was a special cloak. He decided to take it with him to hide from the rain and be able to survive the cold night. Suddenly behind himself, he noticed another, very interesting item. 74-4. It was an axe that, moreover, was very easy and reliable. But he was going to look for further until he could find a normal weapon. It was necessary to hurry up, and until the sun was setting, he had to find food. Victor began to run to find new places. Suddenly, he stopped because he was able to see what attracted his attention. A few meters from him, the house was abandoned. It seemed there could be valuable things, so he tried to get inside. However, Victor was in no hurry and carefully opened the door to make noise. He looked carefully at the corridor and tried to find traces of other people. There was a lot of broken glass on the ground, and it seemed to be safe there. Make sure that there was no one inside. He dared to go. Now, he looked at every room trying to find resources. However, he did not relax and listened carefully what happened around him. The rooms had a lot of beds with clothes, and it seemed it was a psychiatric hospital. Now, he realized that there should definitely be some medicines or other valuable items inside. Suddenly, he saw a storage and right now tried to go there. And convinced that it was safe there, the man opened the door. As suddenly, another man began to approach the house. He was already injured, so he tried to find medicine faster for himself. Victor ignited matches that he could find in the middle. He began to look carefully at the shelves in search of resources. Among them was something he didn't expect to see. It was water, and he was happy when he found it. Immediately, he began to drink, because for the whole day, he was tormented by a terrible thirst. Also, there were so many medicines on the shelves that he was going to take with him. But there was no thing he came for, food. However, Victor continued to search and looked at each shelf. As suddenly, he heard the sounds that resemble someone's steps. There was no doubt that there was someone inside, so he extinguished the match. Victor grabbed an axe and prepared for battle. He was moving quietly but heard the sounds of steps approaching him and became more expressive. It didn't seem to be, so now it was necessary to find a safe place and wait for the enemy's appearance. Now, the sounds were heard from a room with broken glass. The enemy was too close to him. Victor prepared. Here he must appear. As suddenly, he saw the dark silhouette of a man who was approaching him. He waited, but he did not dare to enter inside. Also, he saw blood on his body and realized the victim was injured. This meant that he had already met with other people and was able to get out of the battle. It seemed that the man was very confused because he spoke with himself and was afraid to enter. But Victor saw what changed his presentation about the enemy. He had a weapon, a real rifle that could be killed at a distance. Now the axe will definitely not help him. It was necessary to suddenly attack him to be more likely to win. And, waiting for the best moment, he decided to strike. He struck the enemy with an axe, and he found himself on earth and began to flow blood. Victor smashed his head and watched the body lay in his own blood. Now, he understood that it was necessary to flee in order not to attract attention. At that moment, he began to panic. After all, I realized they were observed with the help of the camera, which was there. The tournament organizers watched each of them. It seemed like a lot of people seemed from the beginning because they were frightened. They realized that Victor, by number 323, began to collect all the necessary items. Now, the people who watched the broadcast were making great pawns on him as a future winner. All this was needed for the sake of regional selection. Due to fear and adrenaline, Victor's hands began to tremble. The weapon he found was very good and was made specifically for hunting. But there are very few ammunition, only 2 shots. Victor tried to check his documents. It was a second-grade man who was also a knife. He continued to look carefully at his body and realized that the man had been injured. But wounds were not from weapons or knife. It seemed that these were teeth or claws. He is some monster or beast. And the participants, they could not exactly cause such injuries. Also, he realized that in fact, the man was running away from something. Now he himself needed to get out of this dangerous place. Therefore, gathering all his things, he left the house. And the body of a man is left to lie on the ground. This night, he decided to spend on a tree because it was only here that you could feel safe. It was very late, and he didn't even hope to see someone. However, he did not want to sleep in order not to lose vigilance. He saw a fiery ring that sooner or later forced all participants to get closer. Then, they will have to fight each other to death. And among all, remain only one. And he must become he. The circle decreased every day at the same time. Therefore, it was necessary to leave the territory before. A few days will pass, and then the safe zones will not remain at all. Suddenly, he saw the vision and ghost of his girlfriend. Julia seemed very confused and wanted to say something. The guy could not believe his own eyes and seemed very confused. Maybe it was some kind of warning. Suddenly, she started talking, and now she was already growing up to him. They said that it was necessary to get up and run away. Suddenly, the guy began to look around him carefully. On the clock 4 in the morning, he fell asleep and realized that it was a dream. Julia tried to wake him up. It was at this point that he heard a strange voice and people who began to approach him. Now he saw 2 men running on earth. One of them had a knife and wanted to kill his enemy. The victim tried to escape. The day before, he tried to meet Victor. But an armed man did not want to let him go and continued to persecute. Suddenly, he noticed that the tree was Victor and watched him. The hero recognized him because it was the same old man. He watched him carefully, and suddenly, he saw the old man caught on the tree lying on the ground. Now he was on the ground, and the enemy began to approach him. Victor decided to kill someone who stays last, and he began to watch their battle and how old they cut off their hand. The man continued to cut it with a knife and killed it coldly. Now that the old man was dead, he was ready to make a shot, and only waited for the best moment. However, at the time of the shot, he stopped. After all, I saw that behind the man was a huge silhouette. It seemed it was a giant monster. From fear, the guy started screaming. He had no chance to escape, and monster struck. Victor realized that sitting on a tree was very risky. Therefore, he descended and began to flee as far away from the place where everything happened. He ran all his efforts without looking around. He was scared and seemed like a mutant pursuing him. Now it became clear why the level of danger was so high, and why the guy had such a strange wound on the body and from which he tried to escape. The developers who decided to add a monster to the game for survival were real psychics. Victor did not know what to do and in which direction it was necessary to run. This night, the monster killed 6 people. He only had to find the victim, and further, he would not stop. The guy realized that he would not be able to run for so long. Very soon, the monster began to approach him and is about to catch up. Suddenly, he realized that he was in the same place. It all started with a hand. Also, he saw the same house he managed to find at the beginning of the game. The monster managed to approach the hero and try to attack him. However, Victor was able to break away again. He struggled to run to the house that was his only salvation. The only way to get inside is a window. Therefore, without thinking, Victor split and jumped inside. The glass flew, however, the monster, his paw, was able to touch him and injure him. He was very lucky because if another second, Victor would hardly be able to stay alive. The guy was scared because he didn't understand how such a strong mutant could be defeated. Especially inside the house was very dark. I had to light a signal checker. On the only way, he will see the body of the monster and be able to aim normally. The window was too small, so the beast could not get inside. However, the other danger was the door that he completely forgot. Victor rushed to them. He needed to do his best to prevent him from breaking through the house. Therefore, he began to close them with his own body. The beast began to break and knock the door. Victor tried to hold on and not give up. But the beast also did not give up. Each time he beat stronger and stronger. Victor's forces are almost left, but he continued to hold on. But suddenly the monster ceased to knock. That was very strange. Suddenly he realized that he had happened what he was most afraid of. After all, the beast began to destroy the house and right now broke the adjacent wall. His hand was inside and now he began to look for the main character. And Victor, pressed against the wall, prayed to get it. He decided to act because he knew that if he did not do anything, he would die. Therefore, he got his own axe and struck a strong blow. From the pain, the beast began to scream, and from his hand, a blue fluid like blood. The guy realized that defending the door was not effective. Therefore, the last hope is a gun. He prepared, aimed, and made an accurate shot, injuring him again. It seemed to be able to stop the mutant for a while, because he was no longer so active and began to drain. Victor liked to watch the monster suffering from pain and flowing blood, but it seemed like a mutant was not going to go anywhere. All the time, Victor remained incredibly tense. The guy didn't know what to expect from his opponent, so he was preparing for the worst. Especially, the light will soon go out. And while it was visible, he decided to treat his wounds in order not to get blood contamination or other infection. The people who watched the main character understood that he managed to survive in a mutant clash. They tried to find out what happened in each zone, and whether there were any mistakes while playing, and no one has experienced trouble. They watched how a huge number of people died, and it has fun. Many of them refused to participate in the first minutes of the test, but they could no longer get out. On the first night, a lot of people were killed who were the weakest. But it was his first round of head further to become more difficult and harder. Now, the developers doubted the need to bring monsters and make them hunt for people. But the main thing did not want to give up this idea because it was their best development. After the first round, a lot of new mutants that were upgraded had to appear in the territory. That's how they wanted to make a new weapon that could be used to reassure people. Before that, it was necessary to check all the data as best possible to keep the mistakes. But when scientists looked at the report, they realized that something was wrong. Their best instance had a huge mistake. It could not be measured during development, and now the monster could not be stopped. The developers began to shout, so the main ran into the office and wanted to look at everything that happened. He saw that the body of their best mutant was damaged. Namely, his hand and head were burning in red. The director wanted to know who was able to do it, so he made the last entry. A while, the girl began to execute his order. All people focused and saw the same video, where Victor, protecting himself, fired just in the face of the mutant. The next morning, he left his house and went in search of a new safe place. Last evening, he lost a lot of blood, so now he felt very bad. His head was terribly crashed. But despite this, he continued to move on. Now, the guy wanted to review all his things he had. During the mutant, his axe was not as sharp as before. In addition, he no longer had ammunition. And there is very little water. From the weapon that could be protected, only a knife remained. Therefore, gathering all his things when he tried to come up with a new plan. The clock was morning, so most people have already woke up and started killing each other. And while the safe zone has not decreased, it was necessary to find as many weapons and resources as possible. Suddenly, a few kilometers from himself, he saw birds and heard a strange noise. These were people who fought with each other and so tried to find this resource. Victor began to move in that direction and very soon saw the body of a dead guy. He lay on the ground and his head was crushed. In addition, Victor noticed that it was very hot on the street. So the sun was rising and very soon it was fully sweated. Besides, there was a fire ring near it, which meant that it was very close to the end of the area. The guy understood that he had to run away because he was at risk of not having time until the area was smaller again. He was moving for several hours in a row, so he decided to find a repository for himself. He tried to carefully inspect the terrain around him, and he listened carefully as suddenly a strange noise attracted his attention. Victor got a tree to look closely at the terrain around him, and suddenly he saw the most valuable find for himself. It was a river with water that was very close to it. The guy began to run in her direction. It was water that was so necessary for its survival and survival of many other people. But before giving water, he carefully inspected the terrain around him. It seemed no one was there, and this place was safe. The main character saved water very much, but now he could use any quantity. Leaning on the river, he tried to understand whether it could be drunk just like that. In addition, he saw what he had given hope. After all, there were crayfish inside the river that could be caught and eaten. At the same moment, he began to dive and tried to catch several of them. If they lived in the water, then it could be drunk. So he also got drunk. At that moment, he was truly happy. The guy left his things near himself, and himself tried to wash his body and wipe blood after yesterday's wound. 91. He tied his wound and tried to stop the bleeding that started again. Also, he scored a new portion of water, and the crayfish he managed to catch could be cooked. As suddenly, he felt severe sharp pain that appeared in his hand. And when he saw blood, he realized that he had been injured. Now he needed to find shelter for himself as soon as possible. He used the stones that lay near him. The guy wanted to look to try to see his enemy, but again shot. The shooting continued, and Victor could not leave the shelter. His hand hurt severely and the blood did not stop. Victor tried to impose a bandage not to die from bleeding. Again the shot. This time the bullet almost hit him. Victor did not know how much he was nailed and how he could get out of the shelter. As suddenly, he realized why there were so many corpses around him. Most likely, they have appeared here recently, because the blood was very fresh. He came the brilliant idea he could use. It was his last hope, so no doubt he started working. Touching a dead man, he realized that he had died just recently. Maybe he died a few hours ago. Victor realized that he was very mistaken because there were always hunters near the water who were waiting for their prey. Well, it was necessary to calm down and decide what to do next. Now he tried to establish from what direction the shooting was. He pulled out his cloak from the shelter and hit him immediately. The guy tried to take into account the trajectory and the sound of the shot, and realized that his enemy was very close. Judging by your husband's body lying near him, well, it was concluded that his enemy was hiding in the nearest forest or on a tree. Now, he tried to drag the body of a dead man closer to himself. The sniper, who was hiding in the bushes, watched the shelter carefully and waited until he began to flee. He was prepared, and at any time was ready to shot. And the stone behind which the main character sat, he always tried not to keep his sights on. Suddenly, he saw someone's part of the body from the shelter. Without thinking, he immediately made a shot. And after he heard a terrible cry of Victor, he saw the body fell to the ground. To make sure that the guy is to die, he again shot him. However, he did not even suspect the dead body was the same guy he killed the day before. The enemy waited for a while to make sure that the guy was dead. The man was very angry because he could not kill him immediately and used so many ammunition. Now he had no doubt because the guy really died, so he was moving bravely in his direction. The man did not even suspect how much he could be wrong. So he calmly approached his body and tried to start a search to find some valuable resources. He stopped just in front of a dead guy. The shooter lost prudence and not even looked around. It was at this point that the main character appeared, who was going to strike a strong blow. He hit him with a knife right into his neck. From what he fell to the ground and began to drain. Blood was everywhere, on the face, hands, Victor clothes. He brutally killed a man and would do it again. Now he will never relax again or lose care. 2. And the man was just lucky, but now he was also dead. And the man was just lucky, but now he was also dead. He could have a lot of valuable things that a guy could take with him. Therefore, he began to carefully search his items and clothing. For the first time in a few days, he was able to find food that was in his bag. This find was very valuable because he did not eat for several days, remained very hungry. Chocolate and candy quickly restored its energy. Also, he found a shop for 20 shots. Also, he had the same gun. He remained satisfied because the things found were very valuable and could help him. He switched a little. He knew he had to move on. Right now, he had to get to the safe zones until she started narrowing again. But there was a fog that became thicker, because of which he saw nothing. He left the body of a dead man by the water, and he went forward. First of all, he must remain alive and take revenge on his abusers. When he opened his eyes, he saw a huge flame. The fire was everywhere, and the heat was so strong that it will not be able to break free. The guy was in the center of a huge fire. Suddenly, he realized that he was not alone because he felt someone's presence. Also, he heard a very familiar and native voice that can recognize from many others. It was a vision in which he was able to see Julia again. But this time, she was no longer so calm and seemed to be very scared of something. She tried to explain to him and wanted to convey some information, but he could not understand anything. Suddenly, the woman began to shout and try to break free from the flames. However, nothing happened and she was at risk of burning alive. In the end, the main character woke up, did not realize that it was just a terrible dream he saw her again in his distinguishing. But it seemed that she wanted to warn him again, and nightmares continued to torment him. Suddenly, he felt he had become very hot. And suddenly, he realized what his dream meant and what tried to say Julia. Just this moment, he was surrounded by a huge fire. The fire was so strong that very quickly captured trees and a piece of vast area. The forest began to burn, and Victor was on one of the trees that also started to burn. It was necessary to run as soon as possible, because very soon it would die. Realizing this, Victor gathered his things and started fleeing. But did he be able to miss the time when the territory narrowed? He couldn't believe it, because he always remained very careful and knew the exact time. Moreover, it was not so late now, and the territory should be narrowed late at night. It was definitely something else and seemed to be involved in the fire. The whole forest was captured by a huge flame that destroyed everything in its path. However, there was no time to stand and look. He did not want to risk his own life again, so he began to flee in his best. No matter what, he did not forget about his mission and what he had to win in the games. Suddenly, he saw many other people who did not have time to leave the forest and were on fire. They began to burn alive and shouted at unbearable and severe pain. He was not going to help anyone and tried to flee as soon as possible so that he would not be on fire. The hero tried not to look back, but only heard the terrible cries of people who pleaded for help. He saw the men began to chase him. I tried to escape. They ran in an unknown direction, but Victor understood that there was no time to fight them. Just now, he had to run to the center of the fiery ring because the area began to narrow much faster than he expected. A complicated decision was made by developers a few minutes ago. They specifically made the area so small to finish the first stage faster. The director was sure that it was really necessary, when the developers were not sure of its decision. However, they executed the order as he said. Due to the fact that survival rules were very complicated, they received a huge number of warnings from the system. In addition, they reduced the area to a minimum, and now people will have to fight each other. Many of them did not even have time to find weapons or other valuable supplies. So now, a real hell will take place in the arena. The director will be pleased to observe everything that will happen. Due to their decisions, a lot of people died. Many participants chose tactics and did not want to rush and go to the center. Therefore, they did not have time to leave the territory and burned alive. The director was constantly watching the protagonist and how he managed to survive. Even in such a situation, he made a special impression on him. Finally, they stopped and decided that it was enough to reduce the territory. But there were problems with their monsters because the management was broken. However, they didn't even think to stop it, but was going to repair everything after the test was finished. Now he realized that his monster was not sufficiently tested, and they could not even predict about the consequences that could happen. The only thing left to follow the course of events by people can fight the mutant. Meanwhile, Victor couldn't understand what was happening. Why did the territories narrow so sharply just as no one expected it? Obviously, developers and leaders were involved in it. They wanted to sharply reduce the huge number of participants to move to the most interesting. Suddenly, he saw him from soldiers who fire lit up and began to run in his direction. His face and body began to burn, and he grabbed Victor and was not going to let go. Suddenly, the man began to strangle him. He wanted to pick up the main character with him, and he was ready to kill him in any way. Now the men were on the ground and unknown, grabbed Victor by the hand. He held it firmly, however. The hero managed to escape. At the same moment, he took the knife and tried to reflect from the attack. So he started to beat him in his stomach, causing serious wounds. Finally, it was able to stop it, so the unknown released Victor. A serious wound did not allow him to continue to fight. The enemy began to drain blood and sat on earth, waiting for his death. Besides, he had very severe bleeding, so the blood came from his mouth. Victor wanted to complete his suffering, so it was at this point that he prepared for a decisive blow. He hit him again with a knife, just in his throat. Finally, he managed to kill a man who tried to take away his life. Now, Victor realized that he had to run as soon as possible. His enemy was dead. Now, the number of each appeared. It determined the total number of participants who remained alive and continued to fight. Now, there were no more places in which resources could remain, because people searched all abandoned homes and were able to find everything. The main character understood that he was scary, but it was necessary to calm down and come to himself. The final battle was waiting for him, on which everything depended. Therefore, he decided to get rid of things that were no longer needed. He gave all the water and ate all the food he had left. After that, he left his bag. She was no longer necessary because the game will soon end. With every minute, he saw that the participants were getting smaller and smaller. So now, he was no longer afraid to go to the center where the greatest confrontation took place. He was tuned very seriously, then tried to stay calm. At any price, he should win for the sake of revenge. Before starting the battle, he stopped and thought again of Julia, for which he started. Meanwhile, a brutal battle between all the people who managed to survive began. They killed each other with bare hands. When tried to surround each other and used all possible options to kill, many of them resorted to very cunning tactics and only waited for a moment to strike. The bodies of dead people lay on Earth, but no one paid attention to it. The main character, choosing a safe place for himself, was ready to open fire. The number of participants again began to decline rapidly, but he tried not to look at the clock and not be nervous. He asked for one of the enemies, and after waiting for the moment, he made a well shot. When it got right in the head, torn it into pieces. 2. Now in the arena, one participant has less. Now, there is one less participant in the arena. Suddenly, Victor will see an enemy a few meters away. At the last moment, he managed to change his position and escape by saving his own life. When he saw what was scared of it very much. That was Monster, whom he had already met before and almost died. The monster rushed to one of the guys and killed him in seconds. Without stopping for a second, the beast destroyed everything in its way. He killed people one by one so their number decreased rapidly. Victor realized that he had to run to save his life. Therefore, he began to run despite the fact that he was at risk of encountering other dangerous people. He saw the house in front of which the ladder stood. It was a good opportunity to hide on the roof of the house and wait until the monster goes away. At the same time, he was able to find a shotgun that could be used. Now, holding a weapon in his hands, he struggled to run in the direction of the house. The monster lagged behind and continued to chase it. Victor believed that if he finds himself on the roof, he will be able to protect himself and Monster will not reach him. In any case, he hoped that the monster would be able to switch his attention to someone else. Now that he was in a new safe city, he began to watch what was happening. He witnessed how the monster attacked 2 participants who were not suspected at all. They have never seen a mutant before and did not know how strong and dangerous it could be. Therefore, they did not even try to escape and immediately found themselves in the risk zone. They wanted to try to kill him because it was the only chance to rescue. Victor was very lucky because other people couldn't see him. Now he was on the roof and didn't know what to do. People tried to kill the mutant, but he did not want to spend the ammunition only watching them. They shot him just his head, but it did not help and the monster remained alive. They did not even have any chance of fighting against such a strong creature. Therefore, Victor decided to stay there because he had no chance to kill his own. Suddenly, he looked at the clock and realized that there were only 3 people left alive. A few seconds, 2 of them were. It was at this point that he heard a shot and realized that he had started hunting. The enemy noticed it and tried to open fire. He had a gun, so calling the main character the coward, he shot him. But he made worse only to himself, because the monster heard him and immediately killed him, leaving no chance of salvation. Now Victor remained the last person who has been survived. He thought it was the end and now he passed the test. But in reality, it was not so. The monster was still very dangerous. And it was at this point when he was preparing to strike, looking straight at his goal. The monster smiled and looked straight at the main character. He held one of the men and left him alive. The monster did it specifically so that the game does not end and he could kill Victor. When the guy realized it, he was in deadly danger. After all, now he has no allies who could help. He tried to strike and try to kill the monster. However, he failed and the mutant easily destroyed the house. Victor was on the ground and hurt the stone. His old wound began to ache and bleeding began again. He tried to injure the main character, but he managed to evade this attack. He began to flee, trying to break away from him. But the mutant was not even about to let him go and started. This time, Monster was much faster than him because the developers modernized it. He easily caught up with the guy by punching his chest through his own knife. Victor felt very severe pain and started screaming. He understood that it was an end, and he did not squeeze a little bit to stay alive and come to the end. Once on the ground, he tried to hold on and not to die. He saw a gun in front of him and wanted to try to get to it. Meanwhile, the man who was held by the mutant remained alive. Victor could not rise and began empty, leaving behind a bloody mark. It remained quite a bit, but he realized that life forces left him and he died. Still, gathering, he managed to reach the gun. Now he tried to make a shot. To stop him, the monster rushed at him and tried to get. But at the last moment, the system stopped it. Mutant remained standing still. It has not moved because now the game will end. The guy who was his hostage died. Victor shot him just in his head to save himself and finally complete this terrible game. Due to the terrible injury, he managed to stay alive. And now, the monster's system has shut down. It will no longer threaten him. A new winner, and thousands of people who watched the event were identified. Victor became the new winners of this year's games. But he knew it was not the end, but still the beginning of his revenge and much more difficult the test that would be ahead for him. Victor realized that he began to die and gradually drained blood. He could no longer keep his eyes open and began to fall asleep. But the director and founder of the game was a different opinion. He wanted to hide the fact of the protagonist and mount the video differently. This is the first time they had such a dynamic and cruel game. The installation plan was completely ready. This video should be a hot topic for talking across the country, so official documents have to be prepared. The director wanted to carefully check the winner's profile, but his secretary did not understand what it was necessary to do it. In fact, everyone knew that Victor belonged to the 3rd grade. It was the lowest layer of the population, so it was impossible to allow it to become a world star, because this news will cause enormous outrage among other people. More, the secretary was not asked to ask questions, and he ordered to do everything exactly as it was necessary. The events were moved to the house where the winner lay. He woke up, realizing that he was in a safe place. However, Victor couldn't believe he managed to stay alive. He did not remember the last events of his life, but he also didn't know where he now happened to happen to him. He only recalled the severe pain he felt while Monster struck. Now he felt very tired and seemed to have been eternity in bed. He was not alone in the room. There were men next to him. They greeted him with a victory and gave a drink of water. The guys explained that he was in a training town that was the center of selection of the best. Victor realized that the first was successfully passed. Men in costumes and glasses had to take care of his health and were concerned if he had not hurt. However, Victor still did not understand anything there. Men were his leaders who had to help. The wounds the boy received during the game were cured with the help of biotreatment and special drugs. At that moment, he noticed how the wounds that were on his body simply disappeared, and there was no trace left. The guy could train quietly in the military center until a new test stage began. Now he was curious about how much time he had to recover and prepare. The leaders explained that the next game was to begin in a month. Also, the management gave him special documents and apologized for the difficulties that would arise during training. He could use everything in his house, but terrible memories of what happened did not leave him. He could not stop thinking about horrible issues that were at first level. I didn't know what danger to wait for him. On this, his conversation with the leaders was over, and they were going to leave him. The round that will expect him will not be the one that he came through. The conductors warned that he had to rest very well and gain strength. They wished him good luck and left the ward. The next morning, he didn't feel better. There was a time to have breakfast, so he went to a local dining room where all participants in the future test. Lunch was quite simple and did not cause any admiration. But he could not eat because he was very nervous through future trials. It seemed to him that he was not ready for it, as suddenly he saw Julia again and wanted to treat her potatoes. He gave her a piece of food, and she began to eat. For the first time, for the whole time, she was happy in his vision. Suddenly, the guy realized that he could not lower his hands at a responsible moment. After all, he managed to go through the first stage, and now he cannot seem so much. Therefore, he decided to do everything that was in his power to get ready and try to win again. He no longer wanted to eat because he didn't feel any taste. So, just left the dining room, leaving his portion to another man. Now, he went to the training ground. The sample stage was not just a game. It was a test of participants on their ability and skills. It was a survival game that took a week to keep in extreme conditions. Their result would be evaluated by several criteria. Among them was leadership, the ability to support each other and to survive in critical situations. Therefore, participants could choose who to unite in teams and how to survive. When Victor entered inside, other participants began to know it. It was a real training ground where many people have improved their skills. This is what the main character was going to do and wanted to work out. He was going to run and wanted to develop his speed and endurance. Other guys who watched him could not understand his intentions. This little worried Victor, he did not pay attention to any of them. He was just sure that he chose the right way and was ready to go to his goal. Victor constantly tried to improve. He read a lot, played sports, and ate. All other people could not understand why he was so hard trained, so they started laughing at him. Every day he read and tried to learn something new. and at the end of the day, he was tired of hard work on himself. Before the start of the test, very little time left. Therefore, people decided to have a special party. There were many guys gathered there and talked there, but when the main character came inside, they all died down and looked at him carefully. Victor went to the center of the room while remaining calm. The girl who worked in the restaurant suggested that he drink, but he refused and wanted to spend this evening alone. Therefore, I decided to choose food and dinner. Now, he needed to find some food. For that, he went to the dining room. He immediately attracted the attention of the suspicious guy who watched him. It seemed that he had some plan, and he didn't know who Victor actually was. And waiting for the moment, he decided to approach him and talk. At this point, the suspicious guy seemed very malicious, and he had exactly a plan. First, Victor did not pay attention to him at all. But then, the unknown decided to join him and sat with him at one table. Victor looked at him just in his eyes. He was not alone. There were many other guys behind him. They knew that the main character belonged to the 3rd grade that was the lowest in the country. Before, he managed to find out from employees, and now he did not know how he had to worry about becoming the winner. He managed to find out this from the employees, and now he didn't know how he had to go through to become the winner. The boys started laughing with Victor. However, he understood that he was trying to get rid of, so he remained calm. He decided to go away, not to attract attention. But the guys did not want to let him go so much and began to shout into the trail. They offended him and all other people who belonged to the same class. He tried to endure his best not to break down and love him. This moment, the guy said that all the people who belonged to the 3rd grade had to be killed. After all, they were all anyone and nothing worth in life. Now Victor's patience is over. He could not let him insult all people and say such disgusting things. Therefore, he grabbed the guy by his neck and was about to suppress. In his hands, he held a knife, so no one dared to approach him and try to stop. The guy he continued to keep his neck began to breathe. Victor was not going to let him go. Now, he began to lose consciousness. From his mouth began to flow foam from the lack of air. Now Victor was going to get it and wanted to kill with his own knife. But at the last moment, a conductor appeared in a suit that hurt him. It was a strong and accurate blow to the head that stopped Victor. The hero fell to the ground, and the life of the guy was saved. The conductor managed to be very timely because if he was late, the victims could not be avoided. Immediately, he was put in the camera for several days. He stayed there for a few days, but now it's time to open it. The conductors returned and were going to enter inside. The guy was already waiting for them and wanted to get out of here as soon as possible. He knew that soon the test had to begin, and he lost several days sitting here. The leading tried to explain that Victor was not right. After all, he could kill a person if it happened. He would be kicked out of the trial. However, that guy wanted to solve everything peacefully and ordered to release Victor. Now he was free, and the leaders began to lead it along the long corridor. In one of the rooms, he saw the same cars that would have teleported them to the new round. Everything was fully ready for starting the game. And suddenly, he realized that the game began right now. Because all participants were not told to enter their cars and take a seat. Each of them was given a bag with all the necessary things that were enough for the first time. The people who participated in this round will be much more serious opponents. The leaders were not sure that the main character would be able to survive until the end and pass the test. But even it was not scared by Victor, and he didn't think to give up. He trained hard and was ready for it. Victor took his place and prepared. The countdown began. Soon he should go. Victor did not forget that at any cost, had to remain alive. Suddenly it all started and he felt the capsule began to fly. It was very difficult to survive the flight and seemed now he was not the way the previous one. The capsule with people quickly rose into the air and began to fly in an unknown direction. And now, he saw a new location through his own window. Everything around him was white and seemed he was able to be high in the mountains where there was a lot of snow. The hero was on the snowy mountain. The probability of loss of valuable objects was very low. In addition, it was very dangerous and cold here, and the environment could also kill it. He tried to look around because, from a height, the entire valley was visible. In addition, he understood that the cold was now his greatest enemy. It was the first thing he was at risk of dying. The main survival items remained the same: a knife, a flask with water, and flint. It was not enough to stay even a few days. He landed too high, so it was necessary to find a suitable place to ignite the campfire and warm up. The clock showed the temperature on the street. There was a minus 30 degrees. There was no time left at all. In a few hours, it will die from hypothermia. It was necessary to descend, so the lower it was, the warmer it would become. Slow but confidently, he began to go down. Frost and strong wind were very disturbed by him, but he did not stop to freeze. It was very difficult to navigate in the area where he knew nothing at all. Everything around was covered with snow, so he didn't know in which direction it was necessary to move. He stopped at the foot of the mountain and tried to survey the area. Below was a large lawn where there could not be such a cold wind. However, he understood that this place could lead to other people who would also want to survive. But he believed in what he could, but for the beginning, he had to stock up with water. He began to pour snow inside his flasks in order to get water. The snow will melt from the temperature of his body. Now it's time to go forward. Victor began to move in order not to freeze. He could not stop because, in such a frost, it meant only death. On the road, he managed to collect dry branches and find a suitable place for the night. Soon the night would come, so he began to breathe fire and hoped only for being able to survive it. He managed to find a safe place at the foot of the mountain that will protect him from the wind. The fire warmed him as suddenly he heard the sound of animals. They were wolves and seemed to be able to get too close to him. This guy didn't expect. He completely forgot that this round could also be dangerous animals and mutants. Then, he realized that it was the bright fire that was warming him that had attracted the attention of the animals. Now he couldn't fall asleep. He had to stay out of nothing. So the main character stayed up until dawn, watching him so that he would not be attacked by animals. Due to the flames he supported all night, he managed to survive the cold. Now he exhaled with relief, but realized that he managed to live the first night that was the hardest. Now began to greet, and he had to come up with a new plan and start looking for valuable items. It was necessary to continue to go down to not suffer from severe cold and frost. Therefore, the next moment, he began to move. All the time, he tried to look at his feet, and suddenly he managed to see the strange path that the animals walked. These were traces of someone's paws and seemed to be a lot of animals. At the same time, the guy continued to collect firewood for himself to be able to breathe fire again. At the same time, he managed to create a trap, and he was going to catch animals to get meat. The guy hoped will be able to catch at least one rabbit. As suddenly, he heard again, and the wolves realized that the danger was approaching. As long as the beast did not see him, he managed to hide in the forest. After getting a knife, he waited for the mutants to attack him and was ready to reflect on them. Now there were a whole pack, and there were many animals. As it turned out, they were hunting and surrounded by a wild deer. All the time, Victor watched carefully at what happened. He understood that the animal was doomed, and he would not be able to save her. In addition, the lessons were very hungry and will not miss this opportunity for themselves. However, the deer did not want to give up so much and decided to fight to the very end. It was a strong and brave animal. Therefore, he prepared to meet his death. He managed to injure one of the wolves with his own horns, but they all acted together, so they had a quantitative advantage. Despite the fact that the deer tried to defend themselves, they quickly surrounded and killed it. Now they began to break its flesh and devour, and the guy was just watching what happened from a safe distance. He had a new plan because he realized that his body also needed a lot of meat. Therefore, he was in no hurry to leave that place and just waited. The beast could hear him, so he tried to choose a more protected position. At the same time, he tried to move very slowly and carefully, but created a lot of noise. Realizing that he was noisy, Victor fell to the ground and lay, not to move. He did not look in sounds and tried to follow them or to predict the attack than to react. But they were so busy eating a deer that they did not pay attention to it at all. The wolves were truly very scary and evil. If they seize a guy, he will definitely not be able to escape. Suddenly, he met with a pack of flock. It seemed that it was an end, because now the wolves rush at him and tear on pieces. And it was at this point that they all started to roll, and after that ran in his direction. It was an end. At the last moment, what he did not expect at all, because the beast turned and ran in a different direction. They left him and Victor couldn't calm down for a long time. He trembled, but finally realized that he really managed to survive. Now he saw that there was a lot of meat on the skeleton. He could not just leave him because it depended on his own survival. Therefore, without hesitation, he got a knife and began to cut, collecting for himself every piece that could be eaten. He broke the bones and tried to chew them. The guy was so hungry that he ate meat raw, and the fact that he could not eat decided to take with him. Also, he took a lot of bones inside which the bone marrow could remain, as suddenly he heard a strange noise that became closer and closer. In the end, he heard a step and saw a person approaching him. It was a girl who was very scared. Victor got a knife, but did not start attacking her because I see that she was afraid and froze. She was so cold that she couldn't say a single word. The girl all the time stood silently, seemed to be very lost and frightened. Victor realized that she would like to ask for help, but when he could not take with him. She constantly looked at the body of a dead deer. There's a lot of meat left there, and now the guy realized what she really wanted. He hid the weapon and decided to leave, leaving it alone with the body of the animal. A hungry girl also started eating and trying to take meat with her. Victor thought it was the right act. After all, in this round, they did not need to kill each other, and the points could be earned for help. In addition, he noticed that despite his appearance, the girl had a very good knife.